Okay, good morning, students. Before I start, let me confirm you can hear me clearly and you can see the slides.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, good. So today I'm going to talk about the treatment of malaria, and I'm assuming you have learned a lot about the parasite, its life cycle, and all related. I mean, in terms of pathology, pathophysiology, clinical features, etc. Right? So today we are going to talk about treatment of malaria. Okay, all right. So this is what I'm going to talk about in today's lecture. I'll show you how we can classify anti-malarial drugs into different classes or different groups, and how the drugs in one group differ from the other group, right? So we'll talk about that. Some of the important mechanisms of action, pharmacological effects, kinetics, uses, and some major adverse effects. That will be the point number 2 to be included in today's lecture, and a bit about what is artemisinin-based combination therapy and how do we use it in the treatment of resistant cases, right? So this is the overall outline of the lecture today. Now, before we go on and discuss about the drugs, let us have a very brief revisit to the parasite's life cycle, right? So some of the important steps I have highlighted here, right? So when a female Anopheles mosquito bites, you can look at the step number 1. When the mosquito bite happens, the parasites in the form of sporozoites is injected into the bloodstream, and the first target for these merozoites is in the liver, right? So the hepatocytes get infected, as you can see here, in the liver, right? Infected hepatocytes, and inside the hepatocytes, parasite divides and forms and finally results into formation of multiple, or this is known as actually the schizont, yeah, hepatic schizont. From it, after rupture of these cells, lot of merozoites are released. You can hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, all right. So I'm talking about step number 4. When merozoites are released into the bloodstream, they infect erythrocytes and they grow inside the erythrocyte, right? So let me see. Okay, all right. So once they grow inside the erythrocytes rupture and they release these forms of the parasite into the bloodstream. So this rupture of the erythrocytes and release of parasitic forms into the blood is the reason for the clinical illness that we see in patients in the form of fever or chills, rigor. Those symptoms, they occur because of release of lot of parasitic forms after rupture of erythrocytes, right? And this is the asexual phase of the parasite's life cycle. Now, some parasitic forms in the erythrocytes undergo a sexual maturation and develop into gametocytes, and mosquito in its next blood meal, when sucks blood, these gametocytes go into the into the mosquito and they undergo further development, right? So these are some of the important steps we have to keep in mind. Why? Because different drugs act at different stages of the malaria parasite, right? Also, you have to remember the infected parasite. We generally, when we talk about the drug targets, we call them at the primary tissue phases, and also sometimes these the parasite may persist into hepatocytes for long period of time, and that is actually known as the latent hepatic phase. So in total, we call it tissue phase. Yeah, the existence of the parasite into the liver is known as the tissue phase. I'm going to refer to this phase of the parasite life cycle as tissue phase, right? Okay. And this tissue phase of the malaria parasite may be responsible for relapse in certain species of Plasmodium, not all. Now, I want all of you to understand the difference between relapse and reinfection, right? These are not two These two are not the same things. Reinfection means a new infection. That means the first infection has been completely resolved and there is a new infection happening. When we say relapse, that means the first infection is not completely treated and the same parasitic forms become active again. Yeah. So please differentiate what is reinfection and what is relapse, right? So for some species of Plasmodium, tissue phase is responsible for relapse. We will talk about it later again, right? Now, and as I told you just now, the asexual phase of parasites life cycle is responsible for the clinical symptoms or clinical attack. Yeah, that is another terminology we use. And the sexual phase in the life cycle of parasite is responsible for transmission from man to mosquito. Any questions? Anything not clear here?
Doctor?
Yeah.
So the relapse phase is when the parasite isn't completely cleared from the body? Is that what I'm understanding?
No, relapse phase means the infection or the parasite has not been completely eliminated from the body and it leads to the same cycle of clinical illness and the rest of the parasite cycle again after a quiescent period.
So in other words, the relapse phase is when it already goes through the initial asexual phase. It does not get eliminated completely, and then it continues to go through the asexual phase again.
Yes. So there may be, a period of as if there are no symptoms and the patient takes it that it is completely cured, but it doesn't because the tissue phase is persisting and it is asymptomatic for a certain period of time, right? So, but in case of reinfection, the infection is completely resolved, but there is a new infection taking place. Does it clarify for you, Elizabeth?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, good. So let me summarize what I explained to you on the previous slide. We learned about the sporozoid, about the tissue phase or the hepatic stage consisting of primary and latent phases, erythrocytic asexual phase and erythrocytic sexual phase. These are the main stages to remember when we are talking about the drug targets, right? And you learned that erythrocytic asexual phase is responsible for clinical illness. You also just now understood that it is the persistent hepatic tissue, hepatic or the tissue stage, which is responsible for persistent infection or relapse. And important thing to now understand further is that the two species of Plasmodium, that means Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium ovale, they consist of both the tissue phase, the latent tissue phase, latent tissue phase as well as the erythrocytic phase in their life cycle. On the other hand, Falciparum has only the primary hepatic stage followed by erythrocytic asexual phase. That means it doesn't have persisting or the latent tissue phase. This difference is very important to understand when we go further and talk about use of drugs, right? So I want to make it very clear the differences between, mainly let's talk about Vivax and Falciparum because those are the two most prevalent species of Plasmodium, right? So Vivax, I would say, has all phases of life cycle in its life cycle, right? From sporozoites to primary hepatic schizont to erythrocytic asexual phase to erythrocytic sexual phase, plus persisting hepatic tissue phase or latent phase of the parasite in the tissue. On the other hand, Falciparum has sporozoite state, primary schizont, erythrocytic asexual, erythrocytic sexual, but no persisting or latent forms in the hepatocytes. Does it clarify everything to you so far in this slide, or is there anything not clear before I move on any further?
Doctor, could you explain the difference between the primary and latent tissue phase?
Okay, so primary tissue phase we call when the hepatocytes are infected for the first time. You remember when the sporozoites are injected into the bloodstream by mosquito bite, within minutes they enter into hepatocytes, right? And in the hepatocytes, they grow and form the hepatic schizons. So those are the primary forms of the tissue phase. But if that primary form continues to stay in the liver for a long period of time, it becomes a latent tissue phase. Now, latent tissue phase is present, or it is there only for Vivex and Ovale and not for falciparum. Clear, Karishma?
Yes, thank you, doctor.
Okay, so let's move on, because this point is very important when we talk about drug treatment. So I wanted it to make it very clear before we move on further, right? Okay. So before we go into drugs, there are a few other terminologies that I'm going to use throughout this lecture later. So let us clarify some of these terminologies, right? So in terms of the treatment of malaria, we use a word cure, right? Very simple, isn't it? English, it's a simple English word that tells you what does it mean. But when we talk about treatment of malaria, we use two terms, clinical cure and radical cure. Yeah. So let us try to understand what do we mean and how does it apply differently to different species of Plasmodium, right? So when we say clinical cure, we are talking about relieving the clinical symptoms of the patient. You may not completely treat the parasite in its persisting forms, right? So when we say clinical cure, we are meaning that we are treating the symptoms or the clinical attack or the clinical presentation of the symptom of the patient, right? But when we say radical cure, we mean complete elimination of the parasite from the body. Am I making myself clear? Yeah, these two terms are important. Yeah, so clinical cure, we are relieving the symptoms, not necessarily eliminating parasite entirely from the body, right? When we say radical cure, that means not only you are treating the clinical symptoms, but at the same time, you are also making sure that the parasite is completely eliminated from the body. Now, if I bring into perspective what I told you on the previous slide, I told you that the Vivex has got both the erythrocytic as well as tissue phase, primary as well as secondary. So if I talk about radical cure in case of Vivex malaria, I would mean that the parasite is eliminated not just from the blood, but also its latent forms from the liver, right? In case of falciparum, if just the blood form or the erythrocytic form is eliminated, you can still achieve a radical cure because primary schizones are anyway going to be released into the erythrocyte, right? So if we eliminate parasite just from the blood, we can achieve a radical cure in case of falciparum malaria, but not in case of Vivex malaria. So how I can put it, it is this way, right? So clinical cure means you eliminate parasite from the blood. When I say radical cure, you eliminate parasite completely, which for Vivex means elimination from the blood as well as tissue, right? These are the two slides or two pictures representing blood as well as the tissue. So for falciparum, you can achieve a radical cure just by killing the parasite in blood. Whereas for Vivex malaria, you need to kill parasite both in the blood as well as tissue to achieve a radical cure. Okay, I'm not moving any further until I hear that this is clear to you.
Doctor, could you repeat it again, please?
Okay, so I'm here talking or taking this further from what I explained on the previous slide, right? So in the previous slide, you learned that Vivex can persist in the tissue, right? Whereas falciparum doesn't persist in tissue. This is a very basic thing that you can remember, and it's easy for the rest of the lecture, right? So when you completely eliminate parasite from the body, you call it a radical cure. It's radically cured, right? But clinical cure refers to only eliminating parasite from the blood because that gives a relief from the symptoms. So if we are talking about falciparum, and if we are killing the parasite only in the blood, we are achieving not only the clinical cure, we are achieving a radical cure, right? But in case of Vivex malaria, you have to kill the parasite not just in the blood, but also in the tissue to achieve a radical cure. You can achieve a clinical cure by killing the parasite in the blood. But for radical cure, you need to kill both in the blood as well as tissue. Does it clarify?
Yes, doctor. So for falciparum, you need to eliminate the parasite in the blood and also in the tissue, while
Mainly in the blood, isn't it? Because the primary schizones anyway are going to release in the blood, isn't it?
right. Sorry, doctor.
Yeah. So just no problem asking me question again and again here. Yeah. Before I move on. If I don't hear any voices, I will understand that this is clear to everyone. Before I move on. Okay. All right. So I expect that this is clear, right? So similarly, what I explained to you about the treatment or cure, another important matter to discuss is prophylaxis. Yeah, sometimes people are traveling to malaria endemic regions and they want to have some treatment to prevent illness, yeah, with the malaria parasite. So you give them or prescribe them prophylactic treatment. So similarly, as was the case with cure, we use two terminologies when we talk about prophylaxis: suppressive and causal. And again, the meaning is the same. When we say suppressive, we are suppressing the parasitic forms in the blood only. When we say causal, that means we are completely eliminating the parasite, yeah, both from the blood and tissue. And I'm showing you again the same pictures which tell you that you can, for suppressive prophylaxis, you eliminate the parasite only from the blood. For causal prophylaxis, you need to eliminate completely. That means in case of Vivax, it has to be both blood as well as tissue, right? So this is how it is represented. You can achieve a causal prophylaxis in case of falciparum malaria just by eliminating parasite from the blood, because there is no persistent tissue phase, right? But in case of Vivax, for causal prophylaxis requires elimination of parasite both in the blood as well as tissue. Yeah. So this is the same what I explained to you about the cure. So similar terminology is also used for prophylaxis. Now, let us move on to the classification of the drugs, and then I will talk about a few more terminologies that we use. Okay, so largely, as you can see on this slide, we can place anti-malarial drugs into three different groups. Yeah, group 1, 2, and 3. Right. I will talk on the next slide what are the differences, but just the listing here first. So group 1 drugs mainly consist of quinolines and related compounds, and you can remember the examples: chloroquine, quinine, and another compound which I have not put here, I will mention about it later, is mefloquine. Yeah, they are all the chemically related compounds, right? Now, second one, important one, is the artemisinin compound. We'll talk about it. Fencidar is a combination of sulfadoxine and pyrimethamine. Yeah, we'll also talk about Fencidar. Now, TC here stands for tetracyclines. Yeah, tetracyclines and clindamycin. So these are the four main drugs included in group 1. We will talk in detail about these drugs. Group 2 includes proguanil and atovaquone, only these two. And group 3 is only one drug, which is primaquine. Right. Now, let us try and understand what are the differences between three groups of drugs, right? So I'm using this table for easy understanding. And on the left-hand side, you can see I have listed here all the drugs that I showed you on the previous slide: group 1, 2, 2, and 3, and all the drugs are here, right? And on the other side, what you see is the different stages of parasite: sporozoites, primary and latent hepatic stages, and asexual form of parasite. We are not putting sexual here because that is not our target, and not many drugs are effective against. Anyway, you cannot prevent infection, just the transmission that is mainly responsible for transmission, right? So sporozoites are the infective stage of parasite. You know that this is the form in which parasite is introduced into the human body. And you know that primary and latent hepatic stages, this is the erythrocytic stage, right? So we can draw our attention first of all to column number 1. So what you notice here, you can easily notice that none of the drugs is effective against sporozoites. So into what, actually, what is the implication, or what is the application, or what is our understanding from that? We can understand that none of these anti-malarial drugs can prevent infection from taking place. Infection will happen, right? If an infected mosquito is biting, right? But the drugs can affect the other stages in the life cycle of parasite. For example, look at group 1 drugs. And you can see that all of these drugs are effective against asexual phase of parasite. But they are ineffective against any of the tissue stages, primary as well as latent. Right? Now, if we look at group 3, you know that primaquine from this slide, it is clear it is effective only against the tissue phase, only against the hepatic stage. It has no action against the erythrocytic form. No action against erythrocytic forms. On the other hand, proguanil and atovaquone, group 2 groups, they have effect against primary hepatic forms as well as erythrocytic forms, but no action against the latent form of parasite. Are these differences clear, students? I think this table is quite self-explanatory, isn't it?
Miss, sorry, can you explain the difference between the primary and the latent form of the hepatic stage?
Primary is when the first time parasite goes into the hepatic cells and develops into schizons and keeps on releasing, by rupture of the hepatocyte, keeps on releasing parasitic forms into the blood. Those are the primary forms of the tissue phase of parasite. Latent forms, when the parasite persists into hepatocyte for a longer period of time, which can be in months or years sometime, without releasing it into the blood.
Thank you, Miss.
Okay. Any more questions?
Doctor, can I call them? Sorry.
Go on.
Doctor, so you mean the latent phase? Is it the phase where the sporozoites change into hypnozoites, or?
Yes, absolutely. So hypnozoites persist for a long period of time, and the infection can reappear. Not infection, we call it relapse, isn't it? So relapse happens again whenever the host immunity goes down, for example.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, who was the other? Okay, Tyagaraj, you were asking some question. Go on, please.
No, doctor, that was the same question.
Oh, it was the same question. Any more questions?
Miss, so latent is the relapse period, right?
Not relapse period. It is the form of the, exactly what we address to is the form of the parasite which persists in the tissue. And yes, it is responsible for relapse.
Oh, okay.
Clear? Ganesh, was that you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any more questions? Because, you know, if this slide is clear to you, the rest of the lecture is just a cakewalk. Nothing much in the rest of the lecture. So please try and understand this slide clearly. If any question? No. Oh, there is some, is it? I can see Ganesh, you want to say something?
No, Miss, that's all.
Okay, all right. So I'm moving on to the next slide here. And as I told you that I'm going to explain a few more terminologies here. Right, so we use a word schizonticide, yeah, something that kills schizons. I'm sure you have learned in pathology, the form of the parasite in the hepatocytes is known as schizons, erythrocytic schizon or hepatic schizons, isn't it? That's a common terminology used. So the drugs that kill schizons are schizonticides. So if they kill the parasite in the blood, we call them blood schizonticide. And if they kill the parasite in the tissue, we call them tissue schizonticide. Right? So roughly, we can say that group 1 and group 2 drugs are mainly blood schizonticide, and tissue schizonticide in true sense is only the group 3 drug. Although I told you that group 2 drug also kills the parasite, the primary form of the parasite in tissue, but not completely eliminates the persistent phase. Yeah, so that's why I have put it into the group of blood schizonticide. And tissue schizonticide is group 3 primaquine because it kills completely both the primary as well as the latent form of the parasite in the tissue. Okay, so now let us put it together what we have learned so far. So if we are talking about clinical cure, I'm sure you remember the definition I told you earlier. Clinical cure can be achieved with the help of only blood schizonticide because you can kill the parasite in the blood and you can relieve the symptoms. For radical cure, for falciparum malaria, you can achieve only by using blood schizonticide, right? For Vivex malaria, you need a combination of blood and tissue schizonticide to achieve a radical cure. Right? For suppressive prophylaxis, you can use only blood schizonticide. For causal prophylaxis, you can achieve it for falciparum just by using blood schizonticide. But for Vivex malaria, you need a tissue schizonticide to achieve causal prophylaxis along with the blood schizonticide. Then only you will achieve a causal prophylaxis for Vivex. Am I making myself clear, students?
Doctor, could you repeat this slide?
Okay, so what I have done here on this slide, use all the information I gave you previously and give some meaning to it, right? So when we are talking about cure and we are talking about clinical cure, you can use just blood schizonticide and you can achieve a clinical cure, right? Because you kill the parasite in the blood and that will help the patient to recover from the symptoms. Now, if it is a falciparum malaria, just by using blood schizonticide, you actually achieve a radical cure because there is no latent tissue phase for falciparum. Is that clear? Who was asking the question?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. Okay, Wong. So, when we are talking about Vivex malaria and where we want to achieve a radical cure, you need to combine a blood schizonticide with a tissue schizonticide because the parasite persists in the tissue. Clear?
Yes, doctor.
Same applies for prophylaxis. Absolutely same thing, right? So when we talk about suppressive prophylaxis, we can achieve it with blood schizonticide for both falciparum and Vivex. But when we talk about causal prophylaxis, we can achieve only with blood schizonticide for falciparum, but not for Vivex. For Vivex, you need a combination of blood and tissue schizonticide to achieve a causal prophylaxis. Does it clarify?
So for causal blood and tissue, that one is for Vivex, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Correct.
sure. Understand. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Doctor,
So,
actually,
yeah, any question?
If I could ask one more question, for the prophylaxis,
yes.
Is it mainly to prevent the infection for malaria or?
Sorry, say that again.
Is prophylaxis meant to prevent the infection or?
Okay, so from the previous slide, what you learned that none of the drug actually kills the infective form of the parasite, isn't it? Sporozoites are not killed. Sporozoites, none of the drug can target sporozoites. So if we use technically correct terms, we are not preventing infection, but we are preventing the disease from happening. Yeah,
so this
because
is
yeah.
So this is meant to target the sporozoites, is it?
No, what I showed you on the previous slide. Yeah. So look at it again. Huh? So none of the drug is effective against the sporozoite, which is the infective stage in the life cycle of malaria parasite, isn't it? Does it clarify your question, Elizabeth?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, all right.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one more question. What's the difference between a cure and prophylaxis?
Okay, so cure when the patient already has a disease. You treat him because the patient has a disease, right? Prophylaxis is when you don't want patient to have a disease and you treat expecting that or anticipating that the patient might develop a disease.
Okay, doctor, thank you.
All right. For example, somebody from a non-endemic area is traveling to an endemic area. From an area or from the part of the world where malaria doesn't happen, is going to travel to another part of the world where malaria is very common. Yeah. So he's likely to get disease in that part of the world, isn't it? So before traveling, during travel, and even after, I'll talk about prophylaxis, how to treat, how to give prophylaxis. So we give certain drugs to prevent the disease from happening. Is that clear?
Yes, doctor, thank you.
Hi, doctor. So prophylaxis kills the tropozoite phase.
Sorry, what's that?
So prophylaxis is basically targeting the primary and latent phase, but it just stops it till malaria infection occurs.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Depending on the type of drug you are using. Yeah, if you are using a drug that kills the parasite in the blood, it will kill in the blood. I will show you what are the drugs and how do we use it in prophylaxis later, right? But certainly you cannot kill the infective form of the parasite. Have I made clear everything to you?
Yes, doctor. One more thing. So, tissue schizonticides cannot act on the blood. Is it?
Sorry, say that again.
And tissue schizonticides act on blood.
Tissue schizonticide will act on the hepatic forms.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I showed you on the previous slide here, right? That is why I put group 3 drug as a tissue schizonticide, because this drug, which is primaquine, can kill the parasite in the liver. That means both primary and the latent. Okay. Whereas when we talk about blood schizonticide, it is killing the parasite only in the blood. Of course, in case of class 2 or group 2 drug, it can also kill the primary form, but not the latent form. Is it clear, Tyagraj?
Yes, doctor, thank you.
Okay, so shall I move on? I don't see any questions coming. Okay, so let me move on. So now I'm going to talk about individual drugs as according to the list that I gave you earlier. And I'm sure that you can easily understand what I'm trying to tell you, the important points only. And if you have understood the table and the description I have given to you so far, the rest of the description is very easy to understand, right? So always remember to which group the drug belongs to. I told you that chloroquine belongs to group 1, right? So from that table, you remember all group 1 drugs are blood schizonticide. They kill the parasite, asexual form of parasite in the blood. So it is a fast acting blood schizonticide. It is effective against all species of Plasmodium, but very, very important point to note here is that falciparum in most parts of the world is now resistant to chloroquine. That is why we nowadays do not use chloroquine for falciparum malaria, but other forms of parasite or other species of Plasmodium are still very sensitive to chloroquine, so which is commonly used. So it is a blood schizonticide. So obviously, you know, because it is from the group 1, it is not going to have any effect on the primary or the latent tissue phases, isn't it? Right? Okay. So some of the important points about chloroquine. Okay, you don't have to remember that chemical name, 4-aminoquinolone. It is just that to tell you that all group 1, all drugs related to chloroquine, for example, quinine, mefloquine, they are chemically similar from 4-aminoquinolone chemical structure, right? But chloroquine is by nature a bit alkaline or basic, right? I will show you why this is important, right? Okay. In terms of pharmacokinetics, the only important points to remember about chloroquine is that it has got a very large volume of distribution and it has very extensive tissue protein binding and storage. That means it goes out into tissues and stays there after binding with tissue protein. So it has got a very large volume of distribution. So based on what I'm explaining to you here, I'm sure you can apply your general pharmacology and can easily answer the 2 questions at the bottom of this slide. Why is chloroquine treatment started with a loading dose? And traces of chloroquine can be detected in urine years after chloroquine administration. Anybody wants to answer those questions?
Is it because you want to have the effects of chloroquine faster? So you need to have a loading dose in the case of the malaria infection. And then for traces of chloroquine can be detected in urine years after chloroquine administration is because of the half-life?
Yeah, it's a long half-life, or it is living in the tissue for a long period of time. So slowly it will get released from the tissue, move on to the blood, and from the blood it's eliminated slowly into the urine, right? So drugs that have extensive tissue binding and the extensive tissue storage obviously will get long time before they get eliminated. And absolutely right, why you need a loading dose, you know that it has a high volume of distribution, right? And a patient who is suffering from malaria, you want the drug to take effect quickly, right? So that is why chloroquine treatment is started in a patient with malaria using a loading dose. All right, little bit about the mechanism of action of chloroquine. How does it work, or how does it kill the parasite? I apologize here to all students for my very poor skills of doing animation, but I have tried my best to do some representation here for easy understanding. Yeah. So what you see here is an erythrocyte, right? And you know that erythrocyte, that the parasite lives inside the erythrocyte, right? They invade the erythrocyte and they take up hemoglobin from the RBCs into the food vacuole, and they release heme from the hemoglobin. Yeah, heme gets released from the hemoglobin inside the food vacuole, and this heme gets converted to hemozoin, right? So hemozoin is in fact provides nutrition for the parasite. Now, what happens when you give chloroquine? It gets into the erythrocyte first with the help of an energy-dependent process. You may or may not remember that step, but it gets into the erythrocyte and moves then into the food vacuole of the parasite. Now, food vacuole, because of all the metabolic reactions happening, has got an acidic environment. Now, remember what I told you on the previous slide, chloroquine is basic in nature or alkaline in nature. So again, try to remember what you have learned in general pharmacology. An alkaline drug in acidic medium becomes ionized. Do you remember this, students?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. So alkaline drug in acidic medium becomes ionized, and once it is ionized, it is trapped here into the food vacuole. It cannot move back towards the erythrocyte or outside the erythrocyte. So it is basically trapped inside the food vacuole, and it consistently inhibits conversion of heme into hemozoin, right? So what is the outcome of this? Outcome is that heme accumulates into the food vacuole, and finally this is toxic to the parasite. So this is how chloroquine brings about killing of the parasite in the blood. And since I said that chloroquine resistance has developed in many parts of the world, it's quite common. There are a lot of theories proposed why chloroquine resistance has developed. And one of them is that over a period of time, erythrocytes have developed a transporter protein which pushes back chloroquine out of the erythrocytes before it can enter into the parasite and its food vacuole. And that is probably the reason for the resistance to develop against chloroquine. Yeah, but there, if you will search, there are a lot of other theories as well, right? So the important point for us to remember here is how chloroquine kills parasite. It inhibits conversion of heme into hemozoin, and once the heme accumulates, it is toxic to the parasite and kills it into the erythrocyte. And that is the reason it is a class 1 or group 1 drug. Yeah, this is what you have learned so far. Any questions?
Doctor, I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so the transporter proteins, they are on the erythrocyte, right? Not on the parasite.
Yeah, on the erythrocytes. Yeah.
Okay. Because if the parasites are the ones that are resistant, shouldn't it be on the parasite so that they can pump it up?
It is, I told you there are lots of theories. So the one which I have, which I'm showing here is that once the chloroquine is pushed out from the erythrocyte itself, it fails to reach the parasite.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah. So there is no way for it to reach inside the parasite, and then the parasite survives.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? None. Okay, so this is just a map to show you that how prevalent or how widespread all the pink areas that you see here in the world have shown chloroquine resistance, particularly falciparum. Yeah, so this is very, very common now, and that's why we have alternate way of treating the falciparum other than chloroquine. Okay? So where do we use chloroquine? Of course, now it's very clear to you, any form of parasite of the Plasmodium infection to achieve a clinical cure. Chloroquine sensitive falciparum malaria, just in case there are certain areas where we know that falciparum is sensitive to chloroquine, perhaps it can be used. for clinical as well as radical cure. I'm sure you understand now, right? By killing the parasite in the blood, you achieve a radical cure for falciparum. Prophylaxis against chloroquine sensitive infections. Now, the two other conditions I have listed here at the bottom, they are nothing to do with malaria. Yeah, nothing to do with malaria, but chloroquine, not exactly as chloroquine, but as hydroxychloroquine is used in other related conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and amoebic liver disease. We are not going into the details of this at all at this moment, right? You will learn about the treatment of these conditions later, but some form of chloroquine, usually hydroxychloroquine, is commonly used for the treatment of other conditions as well. What is the reason why it is used in such condition? We are not going to discuss that. Yeah, we will focus our discussion only for malaria. I have put these conditions here so that you can relate it later when you learn about it. Okay. So a question is popping up here. Okay, explain why chloroquine effectively provides radical cure in sensitive P. falciparum malaria, but not in vivax and ovale malaria. Any answers for that? I would like to check whether I have explained very well or not.
Because it is just a blood sensitive, a fast acting blood schizonticide, right? And it does not act on tissues, which is the liver.
Correct. Absolutely right. So I have succeeded. Thank you for that, Atharva. So I'm sure all other students understand the answer, right? Because falciparum doesn't have a tissue phase, you can clearly achieve a radical cure with chloroquine in falciparum, not in vivax and ovale, because there is a persisting tissue phase. Okay. So what are the common adverse effects and contraindications, right? So chloroquine is very safe. It's given by oral administration generally. And some of the adverse effects that sometimes patient may complain of are mainly GI symptoms, gastrointestinal, for example, abdominal pain or some feeling of nausea. Some patients may vomit, but these are very uncommon, not so common. If you give chloroquine parenterally, it may result into a lot of acute reactions, particularly referring to CVS and CNS. It can cause hypotension and arrhythmias. And also referring to CNS, it can cause convulsions and coma. We are not going into mechanisms, how it causes that, but these are the known, very well known adverse effects of the parenteral administration of chloroquine. Now, one little word about arrhythmia. When you go into cardiovascular module, you will learn a drug known as quinidine, right? And quinidine is related to chloroquine. And quinidine is used for the treatment of arrhythmias. So it looks a bit contrasting, isn't it? I'm telling you that chloroquine causes arrhythmias, but we use quinidine for the treatment of arrhythmias. Later, you will learn that most of the drugs which are anti-arrhythmic, do you understand what is an arrhythmia?
Abnormal heart rate of muscle contraction in the heart.
Rhythm of the heart, yeah. Abnormal rhythm of the heart, right? So a drug or drugs that we use for the treatment of arrhythmia may also have a pro-arrhythmic action, yeah. So that means they can also cause arrhythmia. So don't worry, you will learn about it later. Huh? But yes, chloroquine is known to cause arrhythmias. Quinidine we use for the treatment of, you will learn this relationship later in cardiovascular module, but a very interesting story. Maybe we have 2 minutes. Yeah, we have a few minutes, right? Okay, not enough time to share a story with you. Maybe later if we have time. Okay, let me move on. So as I told you on the previous slide that we use chloroquine also for conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis. So when chloroquine is given for a longer period of time, in malaria, it's a very short-term treatment, 3 days or something like that. Yeah. But in conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, you use it for long period. Yeah. So in these patients, there can be visual disturbances and retinopathy. No need to worry about this when we are talking about malaria. Yeah, because it's a short-term treatment. Now, patients who have deficiency of the enzyme known as glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, they are at a risk of developing hemolytic anemia. And I'm sure, probably you understand what is hemolytic anemia. It is an anemia developing because of hemolysis, right? So I'm giving no answers. Why glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency can lead to hemolytic anemia, and I will just consider it as a homework for all of you to work it out why it happens. Yeah. So please try to search for answer why patients with G6PD deficiency develop hemolytic anemia. Yeah. So, or perhaps you will learn about it in biochemistry. Okay. So the next drug in group 1 is quinine. Yeah. Again, I told you it is chemically related to chloroquine, and just like chloroquine, it is a blood schizonticide. Yeah. Another meeting coming up in 15 minutes. Okay, never mind. Okay. So again, just like chloroquine, it is a blood schizonticide. And you know, because it is from group 1, no effect against primary and latent forms of the parasite. Its mechanism of action as well as the properties that I told you are exactly the same as chloroquine, right? However, chloroquine is reserved as first-line therapy only in certain conditions. For example, cerebral malaria, or when there is severe and chloroquine-resistant falciparum malaria. That means only in cases where you cannot use chloroquine, or it is a serious infection, we use quinine. We do not use it regularly in certain conditions only, such as cerebral malaria or resistant cases of malaria. So what is the reason? The reason is the adverse effects of quinine. So quinine can cause a triad of symptoms which include synchronism, hypoglycemia, and hypotension. Yeah, as you can see here, this triad of symptoms can result after quinine treatment, and synchronism means auditory and visual symptoms. Auditory means some ringing sensation in the ear. Visual symptoms, of course, difficulty in with the vision and things like that. Yeah. So auditory and visual symptoms refer they are known as synchronism when related to quinine. Hypoglycemia and hypotension. This triad of symptoms can result from quinine administration. Some patients may show hypersensitivity or allergic reaction to quinine. Quinine can also cause cardiotoxicity. I talked about arrhythmia. So the same thing, when I say cardiotoxicity, I'm talking about again arrhythmias here. Now, another very serious adverse effect of the quinine is known as black water fever. So what is black water fever? It refers to a condition when there is marked hemolysis, excessive breakdown of RBCs, resulting into hemoglobinemia. That means lot of hemoglobin in the blood, resulting into hemoglobinuria. That means lot of hemoglobin being excreted into the urine, and that actually gives a black color to the urine as it gets oxidized, right? So that is why we call it black water fever. The condition is known as black water fever. So I'm sure you can understand that because of all these adverse effects, quinine is not a routine drug to be used, except in the conditions I showed you on the previous slide. Okay, so another group 1 drug is the artemisinin compounds. Yeah, so artemisinin is actually obtained, these compounds were originally obtained from a Chinese herb, Artemisia annua, and the semi-synthetic derivatives that we use here are dihydroartemisinin, artesunate, artemether. They are all derived from they are all artemisinin compounds. How do they kill parasite? Very briefly, they generate very highly reactive free radicals in the parasite which kill it, right? So we will not go into many more detailed mechanism. This is the only thing you have to remember, that it generates highly reactive free radicals which bring about or which cause parasite killing. Okay, so by definition, you know it is a blood schizonticide. And very importantly, the parasite which is chloroquine resistant is very sensitive, has been shown to be very sensitive against artemisinin compound. And it has a very high potency, actually 10 to 100 times compared to other anti-malaria. So very potent compounds. I'm sure you remember the definition of potency and efficacy. But when you use it alone, its efficacy is incomplete. That means it doesn't kill the parasite completely. Yeah, efficacy is not as much as you desire. That means recrudescence rate or the relapse rate with artemisinin compounds given alone is high. So we do not use artemisinin compounds as monotherapy, as single compounds. We usually combine it with other drugs. So usually what we do is we combine it with Group 1 drugs, usually quinolines, and currently what is recommended is either you combine artemisinin compound with lumefantrine or mefloquine, both of them chemically related to chloroquine. All right, so they are also group 1 drug, and we call it ACT. Yeah, so what is ACT in with reference to malaria? It refers to artemisinin combination therapy. I'm sure now you understand why we don't give artemisinin alone. It has got very high potency. Yeah, you need little compound to kill the parasite, but it has an incomplete efficacy. It doesn't kill the parasite to the extent you desire to treat the disease, right? So you combine it with other class 1 or group 1 drugs, and the 2 drugs commonly combined are lumefantrine and mefloquine, and both of them are chemically related to chloroquine. And once you combine this, ACT gives you a very high cure rate and reduced development of resistance also against these compounds. And particularly because the falciparum is resistant to chloroquine, so artemisinin combination therapy is the recommended form of treatment for falciparum malaria. Okay, so uses, I'm sure you already know now, falciparum malaria as well as multi-drug resistant malaria. What are adverse effects? Very, very rare. Not many adverse effects that artemisinin compounds have. They're very well tolerated. However, how safe they are in very young children and pregnant, that's not very well established, right? Generally speaking, there are not many adverse effects of artemisinin compounds. Now, the third one among the group 1 is Fansidar, right? So as I told you, Fansidar is a combination of sulfadoxine and pyrimethamine. So how does this combination work? Now, if we look at the flow diagram shown here, para-aminobenzoic acid or PABA is utilized by the parasite to generate tetrahydrofolate, right, via dihydrofolate. So dihydrofolate is generated first, followed by tetrahydrofolate, and parasite needs an enzyme dihydropteroate synthase or DHPS to convert PABA into dihydrofolate, and subsequently dihydrofolate converted into tetra with the help of dihydrofolate reductase. And why tetrahydrofolate is necessary? It is necessary for synthesis of nucleic acids, right? Purines and pyrimidine synthesis requires tetrahydrofolate. So as you can see here in the diagram, sulfadoxine is an inhibitor of DHPS, whereas pyrimethamine is an inhibitor of DHPS, right? So both of them are slow-acting schizonticides in the blood, but when you combine them, the effect expected is much better than you use them alone. Yeah, obvious reasons, because given alone, they will act only against one step in a particular folate pathway, but you combine them, they act on subsequent 2 steps in the same pathway, and that gives a synergistic effect, right? Obviously, no effect on the tissue forms as well as the sexual forms. Okay, so why is pyrimethamine effective only when combined with sulfadoxine? Anybody can answer this question? Because there are a lot of sulfonamides. Yeah, we combine pyrimethamine only with sulfadoxine and not with any other sulfonamide. The reason here is that both these sulfadoxine actually has a half-life which matches with pyrimethamine. When the half-life of the 2 compounds is same, you expect them to achieve the peak or the Cmax or the CSS also at the same time. They will get eliminated also at the same rate. So you expect them to work together when they are at the same level of concentration, right? And why is pyrimethamine combined with sulfadoxine and not any other sulfonamide? That was the answer that I gave just now. Why sulfadoxine and not any other sulfonamide? Because their half-life matches, right? And why is pyrimethamine effective only when combined with sulfadoxine? The answer is here on this slide. Because when you combine, you inhibit 2 steps in the same pathway, right? But when you give it alone, you inhibit just one step in the pathway, which may not result into a desirable effect. Is it clear, everyone? You will learn about similar combination when we talk about antibacterial agents as well, right? So you may recall some of this knowledge later when we talk about okay, I don't want to tell you names now, otherwise it will be confusing, but similar concept will apply later for certain antibacterial agents. All right. So where do we use this combination? When we have a chloroquine-resistant falciparum malaria, usually in combination with either quinine or artemisinin. Resistance against this combination emerges very quickly, and that's the reason we don't give it for prophylaxis. Yeah, for prophylaxis, you don't want to give a drug against which that the resistance emerges very quickly, because it requires rather a longer duration of treatment. I'll talk about prophylaxis in a short while. Yeah. They are also used alone for the treatment of another condition which is known as toxoplasmosis. You will learn about toxoplasmosis later, yeah. So not in this lecture, but this is another condition where Fansidar is used, right? So what we have to remember here about Fansidar, where do we use it? We use it in cases when we have resistant parasite, and we do not use it for prophylaxis. Okay, so what are the adverse effects? The sulfa component of the combination is mainly responsible for adverse effects, and mainly the cutaneous reactions can happen in the form of allergic reaction. And one of the, I'm not sure you have learned about it, but you can explore a bit about Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Yeah, it's a very severe form of hypersensitivity or allergic cutaneous reaction that involves not only the skin, but also the mucous membranes of gastrointestinal tract, right from oral mucosa till the mucosa of rectum and anus. So it can be life-threatening and very serious allergic reaction, but not so common. Okay, lastly about tetracycline and doxycycline from group 1 drugs. Again, they are slow-acting blood schizonticides against all species. Tetracycline is usually used in combination with quinine only when we have very drug-resistant malaria, not many other choices, then only we use it. Doxycycline is regularly used for prophylaxis. I'll show you about it. And in children, we replace tetracycline with clindamycin. We do not use tetracycline in children. You have not gone through the lecture on tetracycline yet, but you will learn that tetracycline can actually cause damage to the developing bones and teeth in children. Yeah, so tetracyclines are not a preferred choice to be used in children. We replace tetracycline with clindamycin in children. You will learn about these antibiotics later. Okay, so now we are moving on to class 2 drugs. Proguanil is one of them, and here you can see the same folate pathway and proguanil as an inhibitor of dihydrofolate reductase, right? So it's a slow-acting blood schizonticide, effective against primary liver forms. You remember from the table, it is a group 2 drug. No effect against the latent forms, yeah. But you can see that it is inhibiting only one step in the folate pathway, right? So it is not used alone, and resistance emerges very quickly against proguanil, and we combine it with the other class 2 drug, which is atovaquone, for better efficacy, and we use it in multi-drug resistant falciparum malaria. It's very safe, not many adverse reactions are known against proguanil. So what about atovaquone? Its antiparasitic activity almost similar to proguanil, and we give it in combination with proguanil in drug-resistant cases sometimes. And there is usually, it is given in the form of a fixed dose combination. This is the terminology I'm using here. And just to explain to you, what do we mean by fixed dose combination? Fixed dose combination is the one where in a single tablet, you put both the components together, yeah, and not giving them as 2 separate tablets. So what is the advantage of giving a fixed dose combination? Let's say you are combining the 2 drugs in a ratio of 1:10, right? So if the patient takes 1 tablet or 5 tablets, the ratio is not going to change. They will still be given in the same ratio, right? But if you give them into the form of 2 different tablets, the ratio may not remain the same. You can give 2 tablets of one and 1 tablet of other, or 2 of each, or 3 versus 2, yeah, things like that. So when we say fixed dose combination, that means the 2 drugs are there in the same tablet in a particular ratio, right? So the atovaquone acts by interfering with the mitochondrial functions of the parasite. So when you combine these 2 drugs together in the same combination, they become more effective rather than giving them as monotherapy. It may cause some GI adverse effect, but not so common, and again not recommended for children and pregnant. Yeah, just like the other one that I told you previously, artemisinin compound. All right. So now we are reaching to the last one, which is primaquine. You may remember that this is the group 3 drug, and that is why it is effective only against the primary and the latent hepatic stages, will have no effect against erythrocytic form of parasite. So where do we use it? We use it for radical cure of Vivax and ovale malaria, of course, in combination with the blood schizonticide, and also for the, of course, it will prevent the relapse when we achieve a radical cure. Yeah, so in combination with a blood schizonticide. Yeah. Okay. And we also use it for prophylaxis. Yeah, I will talk about prophylaxis in a short while. Mechanism of action, it is by inhibiting the respiratory processes of the parasite. We do not give primaquine by parenteral route because it can cause very serious hypotension. Adverse effects against not too many except a few nausea, vomiting or abdominal pain, GI adverse effects. And just like chloroquine, it is contraindicated in patients who have G6PD deficiency, right? And the reason is also the same as for chloroquine. Why is primaquine not a useful drug to treat acute febrile attack of malaria? Any answers? Anybody can answer that? Why can't you use it to treat the fever and when a patient comes to you in acute illness?
Is it because fever is caused by the erythrocytic stage and primaquine doesn't have an effect?
Yes, absolutely right. It has no effect against the blood schizons. Yeah, so it is not going to relieve the clinical symptoms of the patient. Right. Okay, so let me summarize what we have learned. Infections with Vivax malaria and ovale and chloroquine sensitive falciparum malaria, what you can use is chloroquine in a loading dose followed by repeated dose for 3 days. Usually the treatment is given for 3 days, and then we add on primaquine from day 4 to 14 for Vivax and ovale. No need for falciparum, right? So only for Vivax and ovale, we add on primaquine for another 10 days to achieve radical cure. What about uncomplicated falciparum malaria? As I told you earlier, ACT, artemisinin combination therapy is recommended. Alternatively, we can give quinine along with any of these, tetracycline, doxycycline, or clindamycin if this is a child, right? Now, if the falciparum malaria is severe, for example, cerebral malaria, what we usually do, we give quinine along with ACT, quinine or ACT parenterally, and this is followed by oral artemisinin combination therapy. Now we are moving on to prophylaxis. This is the last one. Suppressive prophylaxis, as I told you, we can achieve by killing the parasite in the blood, right? So generally the drugs which are used are chloroquine and doxycycline, and the treatment has to be continued for 4 weeks after travel, right? For causal prophylaxis, we use group 2 proguanil plus atovaquone combination or primaquine, and here we have to continue just for 1 week after travel. Now I'm sure you can figure out why there is a difference, why we give here for 4 weeks, why we give here for 1 week. Now when you are giving a suppressive prophylaxis with chloroquine or doxycycline, you are killing the parasite only in the blood, right? So whatever the schizons, hepatic schizons are there, they will keep on releasing over a period of time, right? So you have to continue the drug for another 4 weeks so that all the hepatic schizons release the parasitic forms towards the erythrocytes, and those are killed in the erythrocyte. But when we are using proguanil or atovaquone or primaquine, we are targeting parasite in the liver, right? So we can achieve this usually within a week. Is it clear? Okay, no questions. Yeah, so I think the initial part of the lecture is important. The rest of the is just the application of what I showed you earlier. So there are a few questions. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Do you all want to go through questions or you will do it yourself? Do you have another class immediately after this?
No, doctor.
Okay, shall I go through the questions?
Sure, doctor.
Okay, so just a few of them. Which of the following is a characteristic feature of chloroquine? It prevents relapse. Is it true? Anyone?
No.
No. Right, because no effect on the hepatic phase. Does it prevent reinfection?
No.
No. Yeah, always remember none of the drug can prevent reinfection. It provides radical cure in falciparum malaria. Or it has a large volume of distribution. Which one would you choose? I'm asking for the best option.
Would it be the
Volume
large
of
volume?
distribution.
Yes, absolutely. Because it may or may not be effective against falciparum, right? Yeah. So the best option here is the large volume of distribution. Okay, true or false? Chloroquine is the tissue schizonticide.
False.
False. Primaquine monotherapy is used for radical cure of Vivax malaria. Anyone?
True. Is it
Your
true?
answer is?
True.
Is it true?
False.
The key word here is monotherapy.
It's false.
It is false. Because alone you cannot for radical cure you need a blood as well as a hepatic the drug that acts in the liver. Quinine is the first line of drug for the treatment of cerebral malaria.
True.
True. True. Doxycycline is used for prophylaxis.
True.
True. Primaquine is a blood schizonticide. Is it true or false?
False.
False, because it's a tissue schizonticide. In a patient with falciparum malaria, the most appropriate treatment is chloroquine with primaquine, artesunate with mefloquine, chloroquine with doxycycline, or quinine with primaquine. Your answer has to be
Chloroquine plus
C.
C. Anyone has any other answer?
Is it artesunate?
Artesunate, right? Because you see the first and third are obviously out because you don't need a primaquine for falciparum malaria, right? The only choice has to be made between these two. And you know that the resistance is quite common against falciparum malaria, right? So we said that artesunate in combination with mefloquine is the recommended treatment for falciparum malaria unless it is specified that falciparum malaria is chloroquine sensitive. Does it make it clear? Students, yes or no?
Doctor, could you repeat that, please?
Okay, so most of the time falciparum is taken as resistant to chloroquine unless the question tells you that falciparum is chloroquine sensitive. It's not written here, right? So it is likely that it may be resistant to chloroquine, isn't it? And that is the reason the recommended treatment for falciparum malaria is ACT with mefloquine. Clear?
Clear, doctor. Thank you.
There are some references. I think that is all. I'm sorry I've taken another 8 minutes. I hope the lecture was clear. Any questions?
So, doctor, just to clarify, so when it says it's chloroquine sensitive, meaning you can give chloroquine to treat it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Otherwise, we consider that it might be resistant, right? So the recommended form is ACT rather than chloroquine.
Doctor, if they haven't mentioned the chloroquine sensitivity, but the ACT answer isn't there, do we consider chloroquine as the answer?
Say that again. Say that again.
If the second option isn't present, then do we consider the third one as the answer?
So are you saying that second option is not there?
Yeah.
No, it will be there. You see, I'm making the question.
Okay.
You see, that's the recommend. Or in the STEM, there will be that it is chloroquine sensitive. If I want students to go for the third option, I will say that the malaria is chloroquine sensitive. No, it's not just about me. Anyone who is framing the question.
But then, doctor, if it is sensitive to chloroquine, is the second answer not viable?
It is viable. In that case, also you can use artesunate. Still can use artesunate. So when it comes to the best choice, I'm sure you can understand your best choice has to be number 2.
Yes,
Does
doctor.
it clarify?
Yes, doctor. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Any more questions? Okay.
Doctor, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So even for the sensitive falciparum one, we can still use artesunate. That's a better one.
Yes, you can still use. Yeah. And mefloquine anyway is chemically related to chloroquine, isn't it? I told you that it's related to chloroquine.
All right. Thank you, doctor.
Welcome. Any more questions? Okay, then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank
you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.